This series is supported by Apollo Global Management, a leading provider of alternative asset management and retirement services solutions. Apollo seeks to provide clients excess return at every point along the risk-reward spectrum and is focused on empowering retirees, building and financing stronger businesses, and driving a more sustainable future. Our next guest believes that women should have a seat at every table where decisions are made. But she doesn't stop there. She has developed a network of over 100,000 professional women that encourages venture investment, the development of leadership skills, and intentional networking to ensure that untapped economic potential is unleashed. Find out more next. I'm Aoife Devitt, and welcome to the 50 Faces podcast, a podcast committed to revealing the richness and diversity of the world of investment by focusing on its people and their stories. I'm joined today by Julie Castro Abrams, who's the managing partner of How Women Invest and CEO of How Women Lead. How Women Lead was established in 2011 and is driving at a world where women have a seat at every table where decisions are made, and it's currently a network of over 100,000 professional women. Julie is also the co-founder and CEO of Limitless Bridge Capital, and she sits on the advisory board of NIA Impact Capital, among multiple other roles. Welcome, Julie. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. I love that you're doing this. Thank you for highlighting the stories of women working in finance. We need more of us.
We need more of us. Absolutely. Hear, hear. But I'd love to, before diving into what your work with How Women Lead and How Women Invest, I'd love to chat about your background. Can you briefly walk us through your path to here, starting with where you were born and where you grew up?
Sure. Well, I actually grew up in the Midwest in the United States, in Iowa. And, it was kind of interesting. I'm 56 right now. And I grew up in an era where all these things were happening: reproductive rights. We passed the law so women could have bodily autonomy. We had Title IX was passed, which meant that you had to invest equally in women and girls sports. It really felt like the world was changing. There was even financial access laws that were passed when I was a kid. And so I actually, I think that foundation of all these movements and the laws being passed really fueled me. And even though the data may say the world's still really hostile to women, I really believe that change is afoot. And I bought into that. I also saw my mom's friends. I just felt like every other friend of hers, their husbands left them for the 25-year-old when their kids were in high school and going to college. And these women were destitute. This was before the laws actually passed where, women that stayed at home, et cetera, would get 50% of the assets. And it was horrible to watch. So that impression of like I just remember that thinking like that will never be me. I will never put myself in a position of vulnerability like that. And I think as a young woman, even today, but certainly there's all this dissonance, right? Between what maybe, they say the rules of the road is, and then it's different for you as a woman, right? Like constantly you're like, wait, is it me? Or is this still a structural problem? And what I've been trying to do in my life is say, you know what? Now, today, even we're in this moment where women have 50% of the wealth, and in this massive wealth transfer that's happening over the next handful of years, by 2030, they say women could have as much as 72% of the wealth. This is a massive transformative moment, and women have more education than men and have, there's a huge generation of women like you and me. I've been in the workforce my entire career for 35 years, right? We can make the change we thought was afoot or that we wanted to see. That's what I'm really all about. And, I started my whole journey with justice and women's rights at the foundation. It led me to start a type of a bank, but it really was a poverty alleviation strategy where we help low-income women start their own businesses in the U.S. And that microfinance you heard about outside the U.S., there's a structure in the United States, a certified development financial institution. And for 11 years, I ran a CDFI. We made loans to low-income women entrepreneurs and helped them build their companies. And I started that in the year 2000. And I'm still in touch with dozens of these women. Their restaurants are thriving. Their hair salons are going great. I get my flowers from the florist, the beautiful community-based infrastructure of companies that we all want to see. So that was really, I think those were the really seminal things for me in developing sort of my platform or where I am today.
And would you say there were any surprises that you've encountered as you're building the platform? Certainly, you're preaching to the choir when it comes to women's financial empowerment. And I think how important it is that we recognize that and enable it in the next generation from my vantage point of private wealth. Would you say that when you're building the organization that you're part of, that you founded, were there any surprises, maybe surprising sources of support, setbacks
Yeah.
that you wouldn't have
Well, here's
anticipated?
this is something that we learned. I don't know how big of a gigantic surprise it was. I mean, I could talk about all the frustrating stuff. I'm going to talk about some fun wins. But in 2020, I kicked off our first venture firm. And I was stunned how easy it was. We raised $10 million in just a couple months from our network. And women basically said to me, no one ever invited me to invest in venture before. Like, what a missed opportunity. These are women, like one of these women is general counsel of a bunch of different companies, worked with the VCs to help create exits of different companies and create huge amounts of wealth for people, herself included. And they literally never asked her to invest in their fund, even knowing she just made, how many millions of dollars. And so they would invest with me for the first time. And our minimum investment amount was low because I just wanted to get people going. And it was necessary actually for people, women will, if the bar is very high financially, we don't want to make a mistake. So we will be more tentative and we'll go research more. If the bar is set at the right level and there's enough of a network effect and people really understand sort of some of the other the mission, values-based reasons to do it, women will step up pretty quickly. And within a year, 30% of our investors invested in 2 and 3 other venture firms. So isn't that interesting? They never had before. They invested with me. I made it easy. They trust me. They know me. And that helped them build their confidence. 30% of the people, that's really big. And so we had 221 people that invested in our first fund. And so we did a second fund again, really successful raise. And it made us realize we couldn't have all of our network. Those 100,000 women can't all invest in our fund, but they need to know about investing. And I wanted to get them started. And so I started reaching out to the women-run venture firms in the United States. And I said, hey, if you have a low enough minimum investment amount, you can tell me the values sort of story of your fund. And people could check a box and say, I'm interested in climate. Here's a climate fund. I'll put you on a platform and we'll get a campaign going to just get 10,000 women to invest in venture for the first time. If you think about that as maybe an average of $100,000 they would invest over the first couple of years, that's $1 billion we could be driving into women-run venture firms. That's huge. It's transformative. I think it's 50% of all the money that was invested in women founders in the last year would be about $1 billion. So we could really change the fact that only 2% of all venture funds go to companies founded by women. We could build that whole ecosystem. So it's been really heartening. We've got $120 million of sort of soft commitments, if you will, if you use that math, in just less than 6 months, 5 months, which to me is kind of it's a big indication. That's a big surprise for me. Here's another thing that's interesting. 50% of my investors are women of color. Think about that. We all think that women of color somehow don't have the money, et cetera, and certainly have, if you look at the data, women of color have fewer assets overall. But 50% of our funds are women of color. So there's a bunch of wonderful surprises, if you ask me.
We're going to take a short break to hear from the supporter of this series, Apollo Global Management. I sat down with Joe Moran, Managing Director, Institutional RIA Sales at Apollo. I asked Joe what values united Apollo as a firm.
Apollo is in the business of empowering retirees, building and financing stronger businesses, and driving a more sustainable future. Apollo is high energy, entrepreneurial culture is centered around fostering innovation, challenging convention, and driving collaboration.
And now back to the show. Absolutely. And just the law of small numbers getting to big numbers, clearly.
Yeah.
And what I'm really interested in is that 30% number, that the confidence gap. Once you bridge the confidence gap, how quickly someone can come up the curve and feel empowered to do the next investment. And clearly having a supportive framework that you're offering them in which to do that, to make mistakes without blame or without embarrassment, or just ask the questions that they might be maybe not willing to ask in a different setting. That really, it doesn't take much to bridge the confidence gap, which is just absolutely scintillating in terms of excitement to what that could mean. Clearly, outreach communication is something that is a kind of a hidden, or at least a superpower of yours. Could you talk about the pledge and what the mission of that is, and how that contributes to getting women to have a seat at any table, every table?
Well, I mean, to me, it starts with a conversation. And this is the way women generally work, is you and I have a conversation. I say, hey, I just started doing this thing, investing in venture. And you let me tell you a little bit about it. And you're like, oh, well, I have FOMO. I don't want to miss out on that. Like, tell me more. How can I get involved? And the trust that's conferred through conversations from one woman to the next is actually a massive mover of people's action. If I see you with your extraordinary background and I trust you know what you're doing, and you say you're involved in this, I'd be like, please give me a spot. So that's certainly part of it. I think that if we start a conversation and make sure people know when it's right, they can choose when it's right for them, but I definitely want them to know that they have a seat at the table. So we actually called it the new table. It's a new table of power, wealth, and influence. And women are at the head of the table. We're all there together. That's kind of the idea. We can create the companies, the cultures, and the jobs of tomorrow. I have adult children working in tech companies, and I just look at the extraordinary cost of the problematic cultures, where they fire the CEO because he does the wrong thing. And you just think, what a colossal waste in the markets. One, that there weren't, I'm sorry, but there weren't other voices. It was groupthink, those people who had reinforcing bad behaviors. But what if you had women VCs at every one of those tables? What if we fueled enough of the culture, so 50% women and 50% men starting companies? That would change everything in terms of the jobs that we have, the companies we work in. These are serious. A lot of us spend so much time, how do you make sure women there's a broken rung on the ladder? How do we make sure women get promotions? Well, really is actually having a more diverse group from day one, with leaders who understand. You don't have to convince them that, have diversity is good. Groupthink is terrible. It is absolutely a killer of safety, governance, sustainability for companies. We have to get diversity in all of these places, and it's time. It's beyond time.
And this new table. So if you could just tell us a little bit about what is different about the new table in terms of how you solicit, I suppose, debate, membership. Do you do things differently at this table?
Well, we reach out to people and we say, join us. And they basically say, I'm in. I want to invest in venture capital, learn more about it in the next 12 months. And there's no fee to my nonprofit, How Women Lead, at any moment. This is all, I raise a little money from a foundation, Wells Fargo Bank, and they've allowed us to be, connectors in the ecosystem. So you sign up and you get to look at this calculator that says, well, how much money should I think about investing in venture? And you can pop in some of your numbers. It's anonymous and nobody ever sees the information. It's just a little, gamified, right? Then you learn what an accredited investor is. I thought when someone first told me in order to invest, I needed to be accredited. And I was like, oh my God, am I going to have to fill out a bunch of government forms and, take a bunch of my time getting all my financial docs together? I didn't realize that all you do is say, I make enough money that it's considered safe by the SEC. So those things are gamified. And then you actually also play with this calculator around your values. What is the most important to you? What are your values and how is that showing up? So do you want to invest in climate? Do you want to invest in women's health care? Do you want to invest in companies run by Black women? Like you could click any number of these and it'll show you which venture firms meet your areas of interest and your values. And then you can just go straight to Calendly and get an appointment with one of them. So that's really what it is. But you're part of learning about venture capital, meeting women VCs, meeting founders as part of this new table.
And it seems like because you source the venture capital firms, you're bringing the women to the table. You don't need an extra third party to recognize you or to necessarily be the go-between or the intermediary in order to get this capital to where it's needed. It seems like your ecosystem is pretty self-sufficient.
Absolutely. And in fact, we are not registered investment advisors. It's a nonprofit. There's nothing there stating, in fact, we state the opposite. We said, it's up to you to make sure that you've done your diligence and they feel right-sized for you. But we're making sure you know who's out there. We're just providing the bridge. It's a connection, it's education, and it's community. Women like to do things with other women and they like to have an impact. And I think that sense of collective impact is huge. If I tell you even that you are part of an effort that has now driven over $100 million in just 5 months to women fund managers, that's a big movement. That feels really great to be part of something bigger than yourself. And that's actually, frankly, it's a developmental need we have in adolescence in this middle stage of our life. We want to have an impact.
I love that around the focus on communication and constant and networks, and you have a newsletter. What would you say? And the old adage that you have to communicate something many times until it sinks in. And equally, many of these initiatives maybe kind of flash in the pan and not sort of sustain. How do you nurture that community, ensure that people don't lose interest, don't move on to the next initiative?
Yeah, I mean, we do a bit of a nudge campaign, if you will, of education and just little bites. So our intention is that we kind of say, okay, today check out this, and then you're invited to meet these VCs. Why don't you join us for this gathering? We sort of make sure that it's simple and clear and it really sort of easily accessible for people. But we also have a lot of opportunities for people to get recognized and to do things with other women in their community. So let's say you live in New York. Just last week, somebody hosted an event with some of the women venture capitalists in New York City, and people who had signed on to the campaign, to the new table, where everybody that was in New York City was invited to come. So free event, great opportunity to meet other women, to meet women venture capitalists and really sort of touch and feel them. These kinds of things are really important, I think, for a lot of women. So whether you want to just go fast and get it done, which a lot of corporate women want to do, I think for a lot of us, a minimum investment amount of $25,000 spread over 4 years, $6,250 a year. I don't need to do a lot of research or go to a bunch of things in order to make a decision to make a modest investment like that. I think most people feel like that is something that is an easy yes. So we want it to be an easy yes. And then we want to reinforce it with support over time. So if they want to do more, if they want to be recognized, they can put information on their social media if they want to meet other people. But really the minimum is I want to make it super easy for you to get started. Because most women are too busy. That's one of the things we certainly know. They're too busy to really research and dive in. It's much more right-sized if we make it super simple. You push a button a couple of times, go to a half an hour call, make an investment.
Right. So minimizing friction, removing log jams. I think that's some of the language you use. What else has worked to kind of crack that overscheduling conundrum? Do you find newsletters versus, say, audio or live? Any particular approach?
I think it's things that are right on time and right sized for you. Honestly, I think we're all different. It depends on the day. So, and anybody who's listening to this, you just think about your own behavior, and that's a proxy for it. That's what I say to people all the time. So here are some of the things that we've done. Like I said, you can host an event. So you can meet people in person. You can build community this way. I think a lot of us, for myself, I'm going to say for sure, in my 20s and 30s, I was just trying to survive as a working mom. But once I got into my mid 40s and my kids were off to college, I actually looked up and it was like, wait, I don't have community of people like me. So a lot of us actually really appreciate and want to be around other women that are top corporate executives. So I do think that that's pretty sticky. Another thing is making it super accessible and easy. I do a LinkedIn Live once a week. You can meet a couple venture capitalists on that LinkedIn Live. You can join us live and ask questions, or you can, look at it at your leisure. So we're trying to make sure that whether it's, these mediums that are right sized for us, whether it's a LinkedIn quick little video or going to an event close to you where you can meet other women, I think all of those are good. I'll say the other thing that's kind of interesting is if I'm looking to go on a corporate board, let's say, how do I distinguish myself from all the other people with a similar background who've all been CHROs or general counsels or whatever? If I actually say I invest in venture, it actually makes people take a second look. And so I always encourage people to and say, put it on LinkedIn that you're investing. It just can change the way people think about you as a power player. So if you think about the most powerful, influential people, as at least in California, in the Silicon Valley, they're all involved in venture somehow. You need to be involved too.
It's interesting. I think you touch on a very important point there on visibility and kind of ethos. And, when someone is seen to be an investor, then that credibility builds, but it doesn't sort of come from keeping these things hidden, I suppose. And that is maybe a counterintuitive bit of self-promotion that is easy to do, but maybe is essential to do as well in order to gain that recognition. When you look now to the next, say, 5 years of your vision and continuing to do more of what you do, any particular objectives or goals there?
We need to change the fact that only 2% of all venture capital funding goes to companies founded by women. And it's urgent. We will never have the right kind of jobs in corporate cultures if we don't start changing who was there at the beginning. So I've got a whole bunch of things I'm working on a fund of funds to drive big institutional capital to women-run venture funds that are the highest performing larger funds, but still can't access that money. I'm trying to change financial structures and put women at the center. So certainly I got to finish up this campaign to get $1 billion driven to women-run venture firms. And everyone who's listening, you are invited to the new table. I would love to partner with you and introduce you to our community. And then we got to really disrupt these systems and structures that are not good for women.
And one of the events I've attended is around board roles and women in board roles. And I know you've written a lot about that. You feature a lot of women doing these roles. How does that resonate with your community, and how important is that women are playing more part in the governance structures?
Well, this is the thing that I think that's interesting. 10 years ago, about 10% of all women, all public company board members were women. Actually, it's probably about 13 years now. And that's when I started working on this issue. And my guess, what I see today is our work collectively with others has changed how women think about going on a corporate board as part of their trajectory. We changed hearts and minds. We did movement building by having so many people working in this space of getting women on corporate boards. And so if you think about that as a good example, we can literally make it so, my daughter who's 30 doesn't think that that's for somebody else, that she can put it on her pathway. I talked to this woman who's the chair of the board of Blue Shield. She said she got tapped on the shoulder for her first corporate board, and she told them, "Oh, I don't think I'm ready yet." I don't think that's happening anymore. I hope not, because she was ready. That she knows now that was just because she hadn't seen women like her in the boardroom. She was one of the first. And so I think women know that they should be on a corporate board, that it's good for their leadership, that it's good for the companies, and that they're invited. And I want to do the same thing in other parts of our structure, including venture. Doesn't make any sense that women aren't playing in this space. And if we want to get on private company boards, you got to be playing in those private markets.
And you mentioned the statistic around female founded firms and the percentage of venture capital funding that is going there. And I think what is equally remarkable besides the number itself is that we're not making much progress on the
Oh my God,
whole
no.
at denting
Yeah.
that number.
Yeah.
And now we're in an environment where D&I initiatives are also receiving pushback. Where does that place your role and the work that How Women Lead does? And do you anticipate it being more challenging to make the case for what you do, or will you start to see a real divide and supporters flock to your cause?
Well, this is the thing. The new table to me is actually saying, I'm not going to go try and convince anybody else. I'm going to talk to the people who know that women should be at the table. I just want to educate women and say they're invited, make them feel like it's a safe place for them. I don't want to ask men's permission, or I don't want to talk to the people that are part of the problem and have created reinforcing structures that aren't good. I actually want to go around them by saying, hey, we have the power, wealth, and influence to not only invest directly in women-run venture firms, but if we have 50% of the wealth, soon to be 60 or 70%, depending on what numbers you look at in terms of the projections, that's massive market influence. We can talk to our financial advisors and say, change all of it, change my public equities, all of the portfolio. I want it to have a different flavor. So the power of women demanding change. And then to me, we need to address systems problems. We have a number of systems that reinforce. Think about this. Of all assets under management, only 1.4% are managed by women and people of color combined. Think about that. White men control 98.6% of all assets under management. This is what happens. People say, well, the scale and length of time of this asset management firm, that makes it safe. Well, it doesn't. That is a fallacy. If you look at performance numbers, there's competition now for the first time. And that competition shows that you can make way more money moving your funds. So we have to change our way of thinking. It's not safe just because it's a legacy institution. It's time for us to shake it up.
Which gets back, of course, to the education piece, which is so key to, I suppose, expand our definition of safety and our familiarity, our territory with which we're familiar. Clearly, a huge amount going on and a huge amount to do. Would you say there were any, of course, you started your career, you mentioned the social justice movement and desire to see equal rights and that respect and what was going on while you were at that stage of your career. Were there any setbacks or challenges that you faced that shaped you along that way?
Oh gosh, I mean, so very many. I mean, honestly, probably the biggest challenges are when we have these economic crashes. I mean, it's when you're running a social justice organization, a nonprofit, even a nonprofit type of a financial institution, right? You're so reliant upon and I think anybody who's working in financial markets, right? But you're so reliant on a healthy economy. In 2000, there was a tech crash. In 2008 and 9, there was the banking housing crisis. Most recently, we've had another economic downturn. These are just extraordinary leadership challenges because it forces you to pivot. Sometimes you have to lay people off. I mean, those are horrible, horrible moments. In a leader's journey, and you can try and protect yourself as much as you can, but it's, let's say that you were really disciplined and you have 6 to 12 months worth of your budget sort of in the bank, but the bank's in investments, and then the market crashes. Even your safety money isn't necessarily safe. It's just hard overall. So I don't know. I think those are the hardest for me.
And you're clearly now a mentor to many. Did you have any particular mentors yourself, men or women?
Sure.
And anyone you can mention?
Yeah. Well, I would say Evelyn Dilsaver. She's Evelyn, CPA by training, and sort of grew up to be like the controller of God, I can't remember, one U.S. bank on behalf of Schwab purchased U.S. Bank. I think please forgive me if this is a little bit of not the perfect history, but so she was there and she actually pivoted her career and took a lateral move and became the chief of staff for Chuck Schwab. And it was really interesting to see that choice that she made, which ended up being completely transformational for her in her career. it moved her out of the role as sort of, in many ways, you can think about like the money counter to the person who's working on strategy. She ended up being the president of the Schwab Mutual Funds companies, and she joined my board right in that moment of time when she was pivoting. She'd never been on a nonprofit board before, and she showed me how powerful your leadership is when you, one, understand that your role is to support the CEO, that you only talk when it's important and necessary. And in board meetings, as a governor, you ask tremendous questions. Those are all the things that when you think about going on a corporate board, those are things you'll learn in training, if you will, or in a nonprofit board. And I just watched Evelyn do it. She was a chair of my board for like 6 years. She was spectacular. And she's been on the boards of Blue Cross Blue Shield and Tempur-Pedic mattress. She's been on every corporate board. She's the goddess of corporate board roles at this point. But she was extraordinary as an advisor and mentor for me for many, many years, still is today.
And when you think about any words of wisdom or creed or motto, is there anything that you live by or that anyone has shared with you that you can share with us?
Well, one of the things that, our culture is not great for women. We all know that it's hostile. We have a lot of bruises and war wounds as women. And so I actually have a credo that I ask anyone who's part of our organization to commit to. And there's no membership fee actually for how women lead, but you have to actually commit to this. And it's to be fierce advocates for each other, which really means never tearing other women down. Our culture reinforces this tearing. We love to tear women leaders down. We aren't comfortable yet with strong women in our culture to make introductions and say yes to helping each other. Again, this is something that men are actually better than at that than women. To reinforce her voice when she speaks up and isn't heard, which is women's voices are not on the financial in the financial reporting. Our books aren't purchased at the same rate as men's. Our voices are not heard, and we have to reinforce each other. And then finally, to be unabashedly visible. All this is countercultural. It's the opposite of what we were taught. We were taught to be behind the scenes, that it's indelicate to take up a lot of space or to be too bossy or have our voices being heard. I want us to be the opposite. We got to have a better culture. So I just encourage everyone to think about having and embracing that countercultural credo.
Well, Julie, the work you were doing is akin to a force that is bubbling away, as I think that we don't even know its strength yet. Everything you say resonates around visibility, around lifting each other up, going out of our way, not to bash, but to actually almost support and defend. I think the women that are being not heard, because it's so easy to fade away into the background. Part of the mission of this podcast series is to amplify those voices. What you do is doing that in such outstanding ways that I look forward to continuing to cover the work you do and hopefully continue to amplify that work so that we can see just how empowering it is when we take this mission, I'd say, rather than a fight, a mission into our own hands. So thank you so much for coming here and sharing your insights with us.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
I'm Aoife Devitt. Thank you for listening to the 50 Faces podcast. If you liked what you heard and would like to tune in to hear more inspiring investors and their personal journeys, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as investment advice, and all views are personal and should not be attributed to the organizations and affiliations of the host or any guest.